If you're looking for a mixer that actually lets you run multiple zones without turning your setup into a maze of cables and endless knobs, you're probably wondering whether the QSC MPM80 lives up to the hype. You want something reliable, easy to live with, and worth the money, not just a long list of features. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Most people who shop for a zone mixer feel a little stuck between two extremes. On one side are the cheap, single-zone boards that can't scale, and on the other are massive digital consoles that demand a dedicated engineer and a big budget. The MPM80 sits somewhere in the middle, promising 8 input channels and 8 independent output zones, plus a few modern conveniences like a mobile app and USB connectivity. That promise sounds great on paper, but the real question is whether it stays reliable when you actually press play at a church service, a school assembly, or a restaurant that wants background music in the dining room, the bar, and the patio. I started by thinking about my own what-if scenarios. Imagine you're in charge of audio for a medium-sized church that has a sanctuary, a fellowship hall, and a small chapel. Each space needs its own volume level, and sometimes its own source may be a live band in the sanctuary, a pre-recorded playlist in the fellowship hall, and a spoken word feed in the chapel. With a traditional mixer you'd have to run separate amps or use a lot of patch bays. The MPM80 claims to let you assign any of its 8-line inputs to any of its 8 zones with a few button presses, and the app lets you tweak those assignments from a tablet while the service is running. In practice, that means you can have the worship band feeding the sanctuary zone, a karaoke machine feeding the fellowship hall, and a microphone feeding the chapel all without having to crawl behind a rack every 10 minutes. That level of flexibility is where the MPM80 earns most of its value. The 8 mic/line inputs are enough to accommodate a typical live rig, a drum mic, a vocal mic, a couple of instrument lines, and a few playback sources like a laptop or a CD player. Because the inputs are all preamplified, you don't need separate stage boxes to boost the signal before it reaches the mixer. The 8 zones are true outputs, each with its own level control, so you can set the bar's background music lower than the dining room without any extra hardware. For a venue that wants to run music in multiple rooms from a single source, that saves both time and money. The mobile app is another practical strength. In a busy environment, you're often juggling a laptop, a tablet, and the mixer itself. The QSC app runs on iOS and Android, and it mirrors the front panel controls on your phone. I've seen installers use it to walk through a venue, tap a zone, and pull a fader up or down without having to climb a ladder to reach a wall-mounted panel. The app also offers presets, so you can store a Sunday worship configuration and a Wednesday dinner configuration and recall them instantly. For anyone who likes to tweak things on the fly, that's a genuine productivity boost. USB connectivity adds a layer of convenience that's easy to overlook. You can connect the MPM80 directly to a computer and stream audio in or out, which is handy for venues that record services or stream live events. It also means you can run a simple playback playlist from your DAW without needing an extra interface. The USB port handles both input and output, so you can treat the mixer like an audio interface when you need to record a multitrack mix for later editing. Now, let's talk about the trade-offs. The first thing I noticed is the learning curve for routing. The front panel is clean, but the zone assignment matrix lives behind a menu system that isn't as intuitive as a physical patch bay. If you're used to grabbing a cable and plugging it where you want, you'll need to spend a half hour in the manual to understand how to map inputs to zones. That's not a deal breaker, but it does mean the MPM80 is better suited for users who are comfortable with digital routing or who have someone on hand to set it up initially. Another practical weakness is the lack of built-in effects. Some competing zone mixers bundle reverb or delay, which can be handy for vocal reinforcement in a small hall. The MPM80